For today's DC Multiverse review, we are looking at the Mcfarlane Collector Edition Grid. Before I talk about the accessories and the figure, let's take a quick look at the data profile card. As you can see, there is this beautiful comic book artwork of Grid. On the backside of the card, you do have a read-up for who the character is. His real name, he does not have one, and it reads, Grid was a software program that gathered information for Cyborg. The program grew and evolved into a living computer virus. In its new malevolent form, this sentient form of artificial intelligence attacked the Justice League, forming an alliance with Earth-3's Crime Syndicate. For its invaluable services, Grid demanded two things: a body culled from the robotic prosthesis of Cyborg, and emotions, which was its ultimate goal. And that is a pretty good read-up on who this character is. And let's move on to the accessories that are included with this figure. To correct myself, there are no accessories included with this figure, which is very unfortunate. They could have given him some accessories. And for example, an alternate head sculpt. As you can see in this photo once more, he does have his mouth open. And the head sculpt on this figure does not have a mouth function, so they could have done an alternate head sculpt, and honestly, this just makes him look more terrifying. They could have given him some blast effects for his, cannon arm right here. Maybe an interchangeable hand. There are options of what they could have included as accessories, but he does not have them. And there are a few reasons why I can think of why they didn't give him accessories, and I'm just going to keep it down to two simple reasons. One, he does have a good amount of weight to him for a figure, so he does have a good amount of plastic being used here, since he does reuse parts from the Flashpoint Cyborg Build-A-Figure, which makes this figure quite tall compared to the average DC Multiverse figure. He also has a bit of retooling in most of these areas, except for the legs, so he does have new sculpt. And the other reason why he doesn't have any accessories is because this thing takes up a good amount of room in this packaging, and usually whenever they give this as an accessory, which they don't have these anymore, it's been phased out. The card stand, and yes, this piece of plastic takes up a good chunk of the box. And as you've seen with some of the figures in the early waves of Collector Edition, whenever this is in the box, don't expect much accessories at all. Or maybe no accessories at all to begin with. So there is that. And now, I can add another one of these into the bin where I store them. It's already been like 2 years since I've gotten a new DC card stand thing. Yeah, I don't even know what to do with this thing. It's such a waste of plastic. And for the other item that he comes with, it is the DC figure stand. And that is pretty much everything in this box. And now, let's move on to the aesthetics of this figure. Taking a closer look at Grid here, this figure is filled with a lot of sculpted details, and I really like that about the overall look of this figure. Let's start with the head sculpt. As you can see, he does have the Terminator vibes with the skull-like head sculpt here. One side of his eyes are illuminating with green, and if you look closer, you can see that he has teeth here that are stained in this blood red color. The other side of his eye does not have any lights on, and then when it comes to the top part of his head sculpt, you can see that there are more details that have been sculpted, and the overall head sculpt just has so much sculpted details, which is really good. And it's not just even the head sculpt. As you look down onto the rest of the figure here, you can see that there's so much sculpted areas that the details are just like overloaded. Going to his torso, even if this area is flat here, you do have this circular area in the middle that kind of looks like an arc reactor or whatever it's supposed to be, that's illuminating in green, that's sculpted nicely. And then going down to his stomach area, there is just more sculpt work that has been applied with more details. And one thing that I noticed is that they did apply a wash to the paint here. So most of these areas that have been painted has this wash to give it this sort of fade that just makes it look even better. And moving down to his waist, this is where you can see the reuse that is very obvious. So the waist piece is the same as the one on Cyborg, and for his legs, they're also the same. But the legs are painted in a way that just looks better than the way that they were painted on the Cyborg Build-A-Figure. And that is something that I want to show right now, is the differences. So here are his legs, and then here are the ones from Cyborg. You can see that the gray color is just more plasticky on Cyborg compared to Grid, where he has more of this sort of metallic look to it. And taking a closer look at the legs, here's a better look at the sculpted details for those of you that have never seen the Cyborg figure. So I really like what they did here with the overall sculpt. There's just a lot of like armor parts here that are very bulky. And on the back side of it, you do have more details. And yeah, the wash of the paint really does make these legs stand out more on this figure than they do on the other one when it comes to all these sculpted details. So this is great. And then down here for his feet, you can see more of the sculpt work. Very robotic-like, since he is a robot. And going to the back of the figure, just to show the backside of it, there's more sculpted detail. Look at that. All these things here that are just filled in. It's really a detailed overload, and I just love when they do this, because we don't see a lot of figure get this sort of treatment. And I know this figure is old, it came out in 2024, but still, it would be nice to see more figures get detail sculpts like this whenever it's like a big monstrous character. But in the last couple years, with some of these monstrous looking figures, they just don't really pour that much attention into them anymore. So when I look at Grid here, it's just like a rare treat to see a figure get this much sculpted details. Alright, so that's the backside. Now let's take a look at his arms. So his arms, this upper part here, is of course a reuse up to this part right here. They did retool his cannon arm from the way that it's sculpted on Cyborg, and I like how it's all corrupted looking with all these scraps of metal, just pretty much like very amalgamated. It's not as uniform as the one on Cyborg, where you can see that it's very much organized. Like, these components go here, these components go there. This is just like if you just took a bunch of random scrap metal and just made it into a weapon. And I think that's what I like, because Grid represents some sort of chaotic side to who Cyborg's character is, I suppose. And this part right here is painted red, which is the same as how they painted it on Cyborg, where his blast area does have this sort of red illuminating light. And I like the fact that there is this sharp element here to show the burns of the blast effect cooling down. That is also a good touch with the way that the red paint is applied. And that is pretty much it for his cannon arm. So yeah, not a bad sculpt. And on this side of his arm, you can see his gauntlet thing here, pretty much like his other part of the armor. And this top part is the same sculpt as the one on Cyborg, but this middle area, all the way to the bottom, I believe, are different. Yes, they are. Slightly different. So the middle part of this arm, you can see more of like just scrap metal, just pretty much showing the corruption of the design of the character here. And then his fingers are more sharper with fingernails, which is different on Cyborg. So yeah, just the evil vibes that this character gives off is the reason why I like this figure as it is, because this captures what the character looks like in the comics in a good way when it comes to a physical representation. And for this top part here, one last thing that I almost left out, he does have shoulder armor. And I just found out right now, because as I've been moving the figure, these actually move. I did not realize there was articulation there, so that is cool. So yeah, there is all the aesthetics to Grid. And now let's move on to the articulation of this figure. Starting off with the articulation of the head sculpt, can he look up? No, he cannot, because of the way that the neck is sculpted, and it's just not giving him any clearance to actually look up. That is unfortunate. Looking down, he can look down all the way, so that's good. Turning his head to the left and right, he can do a little bit of, but of course he does run into the side parts of where his neck is situated, so he can't look all the way to the left and right completely. Tilting his head side to side, he can do with no problems. So the overall articulation for the head sculpt is decent, but also restrictive. Moving down to his arms. Now for his arms, it's interesting because he has two different articulation here. So let's start with the cannon arm. So when it comes to, leaning the arm out this much and all that stuff, it's the same for both arms. He can also swing them back and forth for no problems for both arms. He does have a bicep swivel for both sides, so that is the same. Now when it comes to the articulation of where his arms down here, his elbow is, that's where it's different. This is a single jointed for the cannon arm, so that's as much as it's going to go out because there's a little tab here that it runs into, right? And for this side of the arm, he does have double jointed articulation. So there's that. And he has swivel in the hands down here. So that is a difference when it comes to the articulation of the arms for the right and the left because of just the way that it's sculpted with this cannon arm for his right arm. Moving on to the articulation with his torso, let's start with the upper torso cut here. As you can see, there is a good range of motion, which is really good when it comes to rotating. Now, leaning forward, he can actually lean forward surprisingly better than most figures can. That is actually surprising. Leaning back, he can't lean back all the way, but he can lean back a little bit. For his waist, there is a rotation down here, but it's really stiff on my copy of the figure because this is a brand new figure that I got out like a week or two ago, so I haven't really messed with all the articulation of the figure, but it should be able to rotate if you do heat it up. Leaning forward, it can lean forward a little bit. Lean back, not so much. So yeah, having the upper torso cut actually be able to lean forward makes this torso movement a lot better. Now let's move on to the articulation with the legs. Does he have thigh swivels? Yes, he does, and they're loose, which is great because the build figure also has thigh swivels. So it makes sense here for this figure to also have the same, movements. All right, can he do the splits? Well, he can do the splits, all right. That is impressive. So he can also do that. What about kicking forward? That's a pretty good kick right there. I am actually surprised right now. Wow, he can do a freaking kick. That is crazy because you would think a big figure like him wouldn't even be able to do a kick like that, but he surprisingly can. Does he have articulation down here with the legs? Of course he does. It's a single jointed. It's not double jointed. But there's also something else that he has down here. He also has a swivel down here with the joint. I like when they do stuff like this. That's cool. And he does have toe articulation down here. And there is articulation with the feet, but they're like super stiff, but they should bend. There is a rocker, which does allow it to rock side to side. So there is all the articulation with Grid. And I am just impressed by the articulation of this figure. For some character this size to have this range of motion is shocking because there are some other big size figures they have released in the past that doesn't have the same sort of like articulation that we see with this guy. All right, that is everything for the articulation for Grid. And now let's move on to some comparisons. For the first comparison, here is Grid next to the Flashpoint Cyborg, and I really like how these two figures fit nicely together. You can see the differences between them, what is reused, what has been retooled from one figure to another. I just love that there are differences enough where you can tell the figures apart, and it doesn't feel lazy. Like I said, this figure is a good example of how to reuse parts in an effective way by also incorporating retooling elements and some newly sculpted areas to make the overall character design just look better. And yeah, I got nothing else to say about these two. I am really happy having these two characters together on my shelf now. And once again, this just solidifies this cyborg as my main cyborg going forward. I don't have the Rebirth cyborg, but honestly, it's fine because this is a pairing that I always wanted to complete, and here they are. So there is the comparison with Cyborg, and let's put him next to some of the members of the Crime Syndicate. So here he is next to Ultraman. This is the Ultraman from the 2-pack. And I hope he can stand. There we go. As you can see, Grid is taller than Ultraman. Here he is next to Owlman. This is the Forever Evil version that was also a Walmart exclusive. And honestly, I like this version more than the one that came with the Starro build figure wave. There's just something about this design that just looks cool. So there's Owlman. Here he is next to Superwoman. She was from the Starro build wave. And for the last comparison for today's review, here is Grid next to Power Ring. And the two of them look good together as well. So there are all the members of the Crime Syndicate that I have so far in my collection. I do hope Mcfarlane finishes out this team because we are still missing a few characters. And I would love if they just, finish this team out because the license is ending this year, and it's not good if we can't finish at least one more team. And the Crime Syndicate team, in my opinion, would be one of the coolest ones to finish out when it comes to this, evil Justice League squad. So, yeah, there is that. And that is going to do for today's review. If you found today's review informative, do give this video a like. If you want to subscribe to the channel for more action figure content and whatever else I do on here, it would be much appreciated. And with that said, take care, and I will see you in the next video.